This week's Senate Appropriations gave Chris Coons 5 minutes to walk Secretary Rubio through NATO troop posture and ask why allied capitals can't read it. So watch it unfold for yourself, and our research team will break down the full analysis at the end.
Secretary, I'm just going to continue this. One of many things that Senator Graham, Senator Bozeman, Senator Moran, and I have worked on over many years is the U.S. Foundation for National Security and Counterterrorism. Or to put it simply, good for animals, bad for terrorists. That's Lindsay's description of it. A year and a half ago in your confirmation hearing, I asked if we could count on you to be helpful in swiftly implementing it, and you did sign the incorporation. But we've been waiting for a year and a half for the board. Can we move this quickly so you can stop being asked questions?
Yes, no, we want to, and we will. I'll go back to personnel because they vet every nominee for every position, and I think there was an early list that somehow fell off.
There was an early list, and then there was a second list, and we have been waiting for months since then, and there is significant private sector support for this initiative that is waiting and beginning to lose confidence because of just how long it's taken. This is a very small piece of everything I want to address with you, but it'd be great.
No, I get the message. I've heard it consistently now for 4 committee hearings. So
from Republicans
and everybody that works for me
House
that's here is
Senate.
hearing the same thing. So it's I got it. We got to get this thing moved forward, and I'm going to do everything, and obviously in my role at the White House to make sure that we can expedite these appointments.
Thank you. And I just want to associate myself with Senator Collins' comments about RUTF and the bipartisan comments about Gavi and the urgency of releasing those funds. If I can be helpful in any way in facilitating resolving that, I know that's an HHS issue, but at the end of the day, it's in your hands. I'd love to talk to you briefly about NATO and troop posture. I asked you yesterday about the importance of Article 5 and NATO being one of our most central security commitments. There have been some really striking changes that I met with a whole series of parliamentarians from a number of Eastern and Northern European countries yesterday. On May 1, President Trump announced the abrupt withdrawal of 5,000 troops from Germany. May 14, the cancellation of a rotational brigade of 4,000 to Poland. May 19, the president then reportedly reversed that decision about the Poland deployment, but we don't have any further details. And I just learned yesterday about there being no plan to replace the 1,000 troops in Lithuania who just finished one of those heel-to-toe deployments. As you may know, 4 Americans were killed in Lithuania in a training accident. I was at Dover Air Force Base along with senior leaders in the administration and a bipartisan group of members of Congress to receive their remains, and was really stunned. The people of Lithuania formed a human chain from where they left to the airport, miles and miles, to celebrate their service. We have great and close allies in NATO, but because of some comments that have been made by the president and others about Greenland and Denmark, because of some of these troop rotations, they really lack confidence in us. As you know, there's a provision in last year's NDAA that prohibits the administration from lowering the number of troops below 76,000. And with these latest troop realignments, we're getting dangerously close to that. Will you commit to following the law and sustaining U.S. troop levels in Europe at a minimum of the statutorily required? And do you understand how comments about Spain not pulling its weight really don't meet the reality that the overwhelming majority of our NATO allies, largely because of bipartisan and sustained pressure on them, have led them to significantly step up. As you just said a few minutes ago, they're funding all of the weaponry going into Ukraine now. Can we stop scaring our NATO allies and sustain a regular troop presence in compliance with law?
So a couple, you know that on the issue of troop deployments and numbers around the world, that is not a Department of State function. That is a Department of War.
Yes, but I'm the leading Democrat on defense approach, and I got nothing out of Secretary X.
So, but I can speak to a few of these because of my other role, and I get to see some of this. I'm not here to testify, National Security Advisor. I was told by the lawyers to say that. All right. So, but I can speak to it because I'm aware of it. A couple points. On some of these rotations that have occurred, like, for example, the one in Germany, I know it got a lot of headlines, but frankly, the Germans themselves were not that exercised about it. They are aware that all it did is take us back to 2022 numbers. So they knew this was not a surprise to them. This was ongoing, and it was planned. What was a surprise is that it hit the media before they had been informed of it formally, but they were aware of that front. In the case of Poland, you rightly pointed out, there was this short-term rotational withdrawal, but the president wanted to make it clear that our relations with Poland are very solid, and therefore made the announcement the following day as I was arriving at the foreign ministers meeting of NATO in NATO. What I will tell you, and I can't say, but I can't speak with specificity because it's not our department, is we are constantly reevaluating our force posture all over the world, because just as NATO wants us to have X number of troops in Europe, the Indo-Pacific wants to make sure we're not going to leave South Korea, and we're not going to leave Japan. And our partners in Africa now, for example, in Nigeria and other places, want to know that we're committed to the counterterrorism mission. And our allies in the Middle East want to know that now we're not going to leave them because some base got hit by a drone. And in the Western Hemisphere, we have growing cooperation and a desire. So the Pentagon and the Department of War have to constantly take extraordinary but still limited resources and allocate them around the world. I can't speak in detail to those alignments. What I can tell you is that everything we are doing none of it is being done as a shock or surprise to our allies in NATO. Okay. They are informed every step of the way.
I have several other questions to get to. I'll simply share with you that a defense minister and several senior parliamentarians from several NATO allies said to me yesterday they were stunned and unaware of the impending departure of a unit in Lithuania without a follow-on unit, and of the decisions and announcements about Poland. Let's just agree that NATO is critical, and we're going to work harder to make sure they understand. I also want to associate myself with the comments about pressure on Russia. Finally getting to yes on this sanctions bill, and this is me and Secretary Hegseth, delivering the interceptors that Zelensky is begging us for, would put that pressure on. Let me ask you two more things about Venezuela and about the global health compacts and the SIVs, and I'll be quick. I was encouraged to hear you say that we need to make progress towards elections in Venezuela. I couldn't agree more. I recently joined a bipartisan group of senators in meeting with Maria Machado. Can you give us any sense of a concrete timeline or plan for when some of the 400 political prisoners will be released, for when there will be reforms to the Supreme Tribunal of Justice, the Electoral Council, and when we can expect elections?
Well, all of those are topics we discuss with Venezuela every single day. As you know, and I outlined this when I appeared before the Foreign Relations Committee back in February after that operation. It's a three-phase process. Stabilization. We didn't want to see civil war. We didn't want to see mass migration. I think that's largely been achieved. There's a little bit more work to be done there. Recovery, and part of that recovery is building the institutions that make it possible to have an election. It's not just the Electoral Council, which is critical, but it's not just that. You have to have independent media that can operate. Yes. And while we've seen signs that that's happening, that needs to be sustained. Political parties and individuals involved in them need to be able to, at some point, either to return or those who are already in the country have to be able to organize. They have to be able to open offices, field candidates, start to do all the work that it takes to create the conditions for an election. That's critically important as well. And that one we're following. It's one of the reasons why these direct flights into Venezuela were so important, because now people can go and interact directly, even if they're not yet living full-time in Venezuela. But we have more work to do. We raised this. I just remind everybody, Maduro was grabbed days. 5 months ago. Yep. Not 5 years ago. So we've come a long way in 5 months.
Mr. Secretary, I know you are passionate about democracy. I just hope that we will move past this current interim period and towards democracy and free and fair elections and achieve the possibilities of Venezuela, and not leave the unfortunate image of putting extraction and oil and gold and emeralds first and the people of Venezuela second. And I'd love to work with you on that. Two other points quickly. The 32 global health compacts that you referenced, we have no implementation plans. And seeing the details of how they're being implemented would be very helpful. As you know, I've long been close to the Kenyan government and the Kenyan people. We're asking them to take on Ebola treatment, which is getting a very rough reception. There's also real tension in some of the data details around these health impacts. And there is evidence, there's data from state that there's less treatment, less testing, and less prevention overall. And I need to better understand the role of the CDC and how these health compacts are going to actually achieve your laudable goal of more aid to more people faster. Yeah. Well, can we work on these details?
Yeah, of course. But on the implementation, remember, you reach a compact, and now the implementation is part of the compact. You have to work on that in collaboration with the host government.
Right.
So as those plans become available, as those plans become finalized, you'll have insight into those. You'll be able to see that. In the case, just to correct one point, we're not actually in Kenya to set up treatment for Americans. I think the one that's been very controversial is a misunderstanding. There is a facility that the Kenyans are allowing us to open. If there are any Americans Americans that are exposed,
Yes.
potentially exposed, they will be transferred to this facility for observation. If they test positive at any time while in that facility, we will remove them from Kenya and send them to the nearest treatment facility, either in Europe or in the United States, to be treated for Ebola. But what's been controversial is no one wants to see that people are coming into their country.
There's never been a case of Ebola in Kenya. They don't have the domestic capacity to deal with it, and there is alarm that I would love to work with you on to address. I'll follow up with you about your offer yesterday to work on SIVs. We have thousands still stuck in Pakistan who were cleared, who have chief of mission clearance, and you have the ability under the EO, in partnership with the Homeland Security Secretary, to allow those who were vetted to come to the United States.
On a case-by-case basis.
On a case-by-case basis. And I urge you to use that to get folks out of Afghanistan and Pakistan, as well as Qatar, to safe countries, including the United States. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
What made this exchange land was how unglamorous the substance was. Senator Chris Coons did not seek a viral moment. He used his time to press the Secretary of State on two specific structural problems. The first was a counterterrorism foundation sitting idle without board appointments. The second was a sequence of NATO troop decisions that allied capitals were having trouble reading. Neither topic is a cable news segment. Both are exactly the kind of substantive oversight question that Senate Foreign Relations exists to ask. The exchange will be useful to other committees, to allied diplomats, and to the next round of administration witnesses preparing to testify. That is the function of a serious budget hearing. Coons opened with the United States Foundation for International Conservation. The foundation was created by statute. Its board appointments are required by law. The Committee on Foreign Relations has been waiting roughly a year and a half for the administration to deliver the names. Without the appointments, the foundation cannot begin its work. Coons turned next to the United States Foundation for National Security and Counterterrorism, also waiting on appointments. The point was simple. Statutory entities created by Congress cannot function until the executive branch appoints the boards that the same statute requires. The delay is procedural, not partisan. It is the kind of delay that good faith oversight is designed to surface. Rubio's answer was procedural rather than substantive. He acknowledged the question. He committed to follow up on the status of the appointments. He did not defend the delay. He did not minimize the importance of the foundations. He treated the inquiry as a legitimate oversight ask. That is the appropriate response. The committee did not need an explanation in the hearing itself. The committee needs the appointments. Coons made the request part of the formal record so that the follow-up can be tracked. That is what hearings are for. Boring procedural follow-ups are how Congress maintains the operation of the institutions it has already created. Coons then turned to NATO troop posture. The picture he painted was a sequence of decisions over roughly 2 weeks. On May 1st, 5,000 American troops from Germany. On May 14th, 4,000 troops scheduled for Poland were canceled. On May 19th, that cancellation was reversed. 1,000 troops in Lithuania on the eastern flank were not replaced when their rotation ended. Coons connected this sequence to a broader unease among NATO allies. Decisions announced, decisions reversed, gaps left unfilled. Allies of the United States, he said, are having a hard time reading the posture. That is a real oversight concern. Coons situated the troop posture inside a broader pattern. Public comments about Greenland and Denmark. Public comments about Spain. Each individual comment can be defended in its own context. Together, they produce an anxiety in allied chancelleries that is harder to defend. NATO has worked for 75 years partly because the United States has been predictable. Predictability is itself a strategic asset. When the predictability erodes, allies start hedging. Hedging is expensive for everyone. It costs money, it costs intelligence sharing, it costs procurement coordination. Coons did not say the alliance was breaking. He said the predictability was eroding. That is the more careful and more accurate framing. There is a relevant statutory backdrop here. The National Defense Authorization Act prohibits dropping American troop levels in Europe below roughly 76,000. That floor was set deliberately. It is the kind of floor that exists precisely so that no single administration can quietly draw down the European presence through routine rotation decisions. Coons referenced the floor in framing his concerns. Any troop-level decisions made by the administration have to operate above that statutory minimum. The NDAA floor is the legal expression of the bipartisan congressional commitment to NATO. It is not a partisan tripwire. It was passed by both parties. Senate oversight is checking compliance with the floor that Senate itself wrote. Rubio's response on the troop question was jurisdictional. He said clearly that troop deployment decisions are not a Department of State function. They are a Department of Defense function. The Secretary of State does not order troop movements. He acknowledged he had read the same press reporting that Senator Coons had read, but he did not have visibility into the operational decisions behind it. He suggested that Coons direct the question to the Secretary of Defense, who would be the right official to address it. That is technically correct. It is also the standard limit of what a State Department witness can say about troop posture in an open hearing. The jurisdictional answer is the honest one. That said, there is a layer of the question that is squarely State Department territory. The diplomatic effect of troop posture changes on allied relationships is the State Department's responsibility. When allies start hedging because of a troop rotation gap, the cost shows up in diplomatic engagements, intelligence sharing arrangements, and procurement coordination, all of which sit at state. Coons was raising the diplomatic effect, not asking for an operational decision. That part of the question deserved a substantive answer, even if the deployment itself is a defense issue. The exchange ended before that distinction was fully drawn out. It is a distinction worth following up on in the next round of oversight. Coons referenced a recent training incident in Lithuania in which 4 American service members lost their lives. He raised it as a reminder of the real stakes that sit underneath any conversation about troop posture in Europe. Service members are deployed forward. Their families wait at home. Any rotation gap, any unfilled position has names attached to it. The point was not to assign blame for the incident. It was to make sure that the formal hearing record contained the human stakes alongside the procurement and posture decisions. The reminder belongs on the record. The exchange was better for having it there. The committee's responsibility carries a human weight that numbers alone cannot capture. It is worth understanding how allied capitals read American hearings. They do not wait for major policy speeches. They study committee transcripts within hours of the hearing ending. They look for the level of detail that committee members request, the precision of administration answers, and the topics that get raised twice in the same week. A NATO troop posture question raised by a senior foreign relations Democrat in a hearing about the State Department budget gets read in Warsaw, in Berlin, in Stockholm, in Helsinki, and in Vilnius. The framing of the question and the framing of the answer both feed into how those capitals plan their own defense procurement and their own diplomatic engagement. Hearings are international documents. There is a deeper analytical point underneath the Allied anxiety question. NATO planning runs on multi-year procurement cycles. Allies invest in interoperable equipment that requires consistent American positions to remain useful. Allies station forces forward in trust that American positions will not reverse without warning. That trust is the alliance. When announcements reverse twice in 2 weeks, the trust takes a small hit. Many small hits over a sustained period erode the planning premise. The cost of erosion is not visible in any single decision. It is visible across years in deferred allied procurement, in slower intelligence sharing, in reduced exercise participation. Coons was raising a long arc concern, not a daily news cycle one. Step back and look at the format Coons used. He did not posture. He did not frame the questions as accusations. He framed them as oversight. He acknowledged that he was working from public reporting rather than classified channels. He invited the secretary to correct any factual misimpressions. He set up the appointments question as a procedural ask, not a political indictment. That posture matters. It is the posture that gets cabinet officials to answer rather than to evade. It is also the posture that produces transcript material that other oversight bodies can build on. Coons used the format the way the format works best. The result is a more useful record for everyone. The follow-up on this exchange will run in 3 streams. The first is the list of board appointments to the 2 statutory foundations Coons raised. The committee can require a written status update within 30 days. The second is the NATO troop posture sequence. The Defense Department witness who follows the State Department witness should expect a near-identical question and should be prepared with the deployment numbers. The third is the readouts from allied embassies on how American posture is being received. Those readouts are typically classified, but committee briefings can surface enough to ground the oversight. 3 streams, all routine, none viral, all important. That is what serious oversight looks like. Set the scale, roughly 76,000 American service members are stationed in Europe under the NATO framework. That number is the floor that Congress wrote into the NDAA. Allies depend on it. American defense planning depends on it. The defense industrial base on both sides of the Atlantic is built around it. Adjusting that posture is a major strategic decision that requires both executive deliberation and legislative consultation. Adjusting it through quiet rotation gaps or through public announcements that reverse within days is not the right way to make a major strategic decision. The committee is right to insist on procedural clarity. Procedural clarity is how 76,000 service members and their families get treated with the respect their service deserves. One small linguistic note from the exchange. Rubio referred to the Department of Defense as the Department of War. The name change has been formalized at the executive level. Whether Congress will recognize the new name across all statutory references is a separate question. For now, both names are circulating in the official discourse. The new name is meant to signal a different posture. Whether the new posture matches the new name is the question allies are watching. The hearing record will reflect the transition. Future committees will need to decide how to handle the bifurcation in their own questions. For now, it sits in the transcript as a marker of the moment the language shifted. Remember the hearing's formal purpose. It was a review of the President's fiscal year 2027 budget request for the Department of State. The Appropriations Committee will eventually write a budget bill that includes line items for the foundations Coons raised, for the diplomatic engagement that responds to Allied anxiety, and for the embassy staffing that surfaces Allied readouts. Every question Coons asked is going to translate into specific budget line items in the next markup. That is how Senate Appropriations works. Questions asked in June shape numbers proposed in October that become law in December. The substantive oversight done in this exchange will appear in next year's appropriations text. NATO is one of the few foreign policy projects that has retained genuine bipartisan support across roughly 7 decades. The alliance has been led by Republican administrations and Democratic administrations. Its founding documents were drafted under Truman. Its expansion eastward was led under Clinton and George W. Bush. Its strengthening after Russia's actions in Ukraine has been led under both Biden and the current administration. The bipartisan history is itself an asset. It is what allies are counting on when they make multi-decade procurement decisions. The oversight Coons performed in this exchange is in that tradition. It is the long bipartisan tradition of checking executive posture against the alliance's strategic value. Give both sides their due. Coons placed 3 distinct questions on the formal record: the foundation appointments, the NATO troop posture, the Allied anxiety from broader public comments. Rubio answered each within his jurisdictional remit. The appointments would be tracked. The troop questions would be redirected to the Department of War. The Allied perception would be addressed in subsequent engagements. Neither side conceded ground. Neither side scored a viral hit. The record holds both sides. The next round of follow-up will determine which side's framing ages better. In the meantime, both perform the format the way the format works. The exchange is useful. This exchange will be cited for months in Allied capitals more than in American media. Analysts at NATO will refer to it. European foreign ministries will reference it. Defense procurement officers in Warsaw and Stockholm will read it. American policy is consumed internationally as much as domestically, and Senate Foreign Relations transcripts are among the highest signaled documents in that international consumption. Coons knew that. He pitched the questions for that audience as much as for the domestic audience. That is appropriate. The State Department's budget is, by definition, a document about American engagement abroad. Hearings about it should be readable by the people America is engaging with. This one was. So the final accountability question is the standard one. What was gained, what was lost, and who is paying the cost? If the gain is a tighter alignment between American troop posture and statutory floors, plus an unblocked counterterrorism foundation doing real work, then the oversight Coons performed will have produced concrete results. If the cost is sustained Allied uncertainty that translates into deferred procurement and slower coordination, then the oversight will have caught the problem early enough to fix it. The committee should make both sides put their numbers on the table over the next 30 days. The board appointments, the deployment counts, the Allied readouts. Then the public can decide what kind of policy it is actually buying.